I've covered a lot of Switch accessories over the years, and today is something a little bit different. This is the Glyph controller. A leverless fight-style controller that has not actually fully released yet. In fact, this isn't even the final version of it. This is a prototype that was sent to me to try out. It is currently something that is on Kickstarter. Now, because this is a thing on Kickstarter, I do feel like I should disclose this video is not sponsored. In fact, this is even a unit that I'm getting to keep. I have to send this one back over so some other people can get to try it out. But after spending some time using it, I just think it's kind of interesting and wanted to bring a couple little more eyes over to this device. Now, leverless fight controllers like this are a relatively new thing to me. If you've kept up with the channel, you may have seen that I did a review of the Razer Kitsune about a month back, and that was really the first one that I've spent extensive time with, so this is really my second one that I'm messing around with. But something that's very interesting about this one that's different from a lot of other ones on the market is the heavy focus on modularity. This is not something that's being built as just a straight out of the box, simple, straightforward tool, though there are ways you could treat it that way. This is really an enthusiast aimed controller that allows you to have a lot of freedom and customization over doing what you want with it. As evidenced by the sheer large number of buttons on this, which this way looks maybe a little intimidating and over the top. There's a reason why there's this many buttons that'll make sense in a little bit. But it's interesting, really interesting. So first off, if you're unfamiliar with what controllers like this are, this is a leverless fight stick controller, not really a stick anymore, that's basically an evolution of the arcade stick format, where instead of having your button sets for what you're pressing and then a large control stick that you're using, you instead rely on a full button setup, which allows for more reliable and clear inputs. There's no chance of you overrolling a quarter circle input. There's no way that you're gonna accidentally hit a diagonal when you only wanna do left or right. You have very clear, clean inputs because you are pressing a button instead. And where the Glyph is taking this in a much more in-depth direction is its approach to being able to allow you to basically set this up in a large number of different configurations. The way they're working it on the Kickstarter right now is that there are numerous different faceplates that mimic different popular button setups. There's the more traditional FGZ style, which is what the Razer Kitsune uses. That's the one that I'm most familiar with for using with games like Street Fighter. There's another layout that is more intended for platform fighters, Smash being the main draw here. And then this particular layout that I have up here right now is basically the all-in-one setup where every single button is installed all at the same time. And the idea here is that you can basically craft this controller the way that you want. The other configurations give you slightly more traditional, straightforward setups that are designed for specific types of games in mind, whereas this everything happening all at once controller is where you can fine-tune a specific style you prefer or use it across a larger variety of games. In fact, customizing it is as simple as just lifting off the top faceplate and then removing the buttons and MX switches as you please, and then placing another faceplate over that just covers the specific buttons for certain traditional layout styles. Or another option with this is that they have dummy buttons where you remove one of these buttons and take out the underlying switch and place a button over it so that it doesn't leave a gaping hole where that button used to be, but it effectively just has a placeholder button that doesn't do anything, so there's no worries about accidentally pressing a button that you don't want to press. Now again, modularity and customization is a big focus of this thing. However, there are of course things that are kind of stock default about it, one of which is the switch type that it comes with. These are using a Gatoron Silver switch, which has a button feel that I would say is very similar to a lot of traditional arcade stick buttons, where they're very light on resistance, there's not really a clicky feedback or anything like that, but allows for very smooth and rapid presses across the buttons. Though if you have a preference for a different switch type, for instance, maybe you want something that does give a clicky feedback, you do have the ability to remove these switches very easily because that's what you have to do to swap out the configurations anyways, and swap in whatever switch type you would prefer to use. Obviously, the switches are not only easy to remove, but so are the individual buttons. You can swap those out or even paint or color them, design them a way that you would prefer. And because the whole faceplate comes out, obviously you can also customize that with whatever design you would like as well. Another interesting aspect is the open compatibility of this device. By default, without using any kind of additional adapters or messing with firmware, this is able to connect to Nintendo Switch or PC via USB. And they've also clarified that you can use certain Brook adapters for allowing it to work on Xbox and PlayStation consoles, which have been a popular option for people that want to use a fight stick on a system it's not designed for intentionally. But one of the really interesting things about this that surprised me is that as part of this prototype, I was sent a whole bunch of USB-C adapter cables that allows this to hook up to retro systems as well, including NES, SNES, N64, and GameCube. So if you wanted to use this to play an old school Smash game, you want to jump into some Melee, this actually does work on old GameCube hardware, which is extremely intriguing to me. And one of the things about this too is that the firmware for the system and all the ways that it can be customized on a software level is open source. People want to do their own things as far as configurations or settings on the controller go. That is something that they have access to. It's not something that's trying to be kept some kind of under wraps secret as part of the hardware. One other thing I want to cover real quick is there is also a carrying case design for the Glyph that I'm actually finding really handy. It not only fits the Glyph itself, but has spare room for fitting additional faceplates, as well as storage for additional switches, button caps, cables for using with different systems, and the calipers that you use for swapping in and out switches. Basically fitting everything you need and keeping it protected. When I look at a controller like this and what it's just capable of and all the options out there, my big walkaway feeling is that this is something I think could really appeal to a lot of enthusiasts, but might not necessarily be the right fit for someone looking for something just right out of the box. There is a lot that this controller is capable of, both in terms of fine-tuning for your own personal uses and compatibility across a wide number of devices, if you're willing to put the work into it. But at the same time, it is definitely something a little overwhelming if you were to open this up for the first time and just are greeted with all of these buttons and a fairly plain interface that's intentionally not describing what every button is meant to be, because each button is going to be dependent on how you want to set it up. And I will say that with that said, the actual process of doing things like swapping between modes really isn't all that bad. Even the act of removing and adding buttons, if that's not something you're used to doing or it sounds like a lot of work because you haven't done that kind of work on a keyboard or anything before, it's really simple in this. You basically just rip off the button heads and then use an included tool for removing each of the individual switches. It's one of those things where if you've never messed with something like this before, it sounds really intimidating, but it's actually not bad, like at all. It's very straightforward. Because this is a prototype and not necessarily a final version, I don't want to necessarily leave this off on some kind of final verdict of the device itself. Whether or not we see these come to a kind of larger scale release and distribution depends, I'm sure, on how well the Kickstarter does, but I think there is a ton of potential in something like this, and in the hands of people who really embrace this kind of modularity and customization, it can be a powerful tool. So that's just my thoughts on the prototype of the Glyph. Again, this is not something that has been actually officially released yet. There is a link down below in the description if you want to check out their Kickstarter. I will say price-wise, it's not the cheapest thing out there, but when you compare it to a lot of competitively priced sticks in a similar arena, kind of like the Razer Kitsune that I did a review of recently, it's really not that bad price line wise. Getting all the different faceplates certainly ups it more, but that's also the point of those dummy buttons. You can always grab this full controller layout and then just use dummy buttons when you want to swap between different modes, or if you know you're only going to use it for a specific kind of game like Smash Brothers, Street Fighter, whatever, you can get the configuration that makes the most sense for that style of game. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later.